that you care about humanitarian issues. We get that you care about these oppressed minorities. You don't have to do a thing. We are going to reform internally. We are going to give minority populations, and here when I'm saying minorities, I mean these Christian minorities, we're going to give them rights. Don't worry about it. We've got it covered, right? The great powers, Britain and France, write into the treaty, the 1856 treaty, the Treaty of Paris, they write into the treaty that you must pay attention to minority rights in your dealings with your own subject populations. A strange thing to be written into a peace treaty, right? But this was a demand of the treaty, and it really, I think, codifies for the first time a real sense that the West understands humanitarianism as part of these larger geopolitical concerns. I think it's a really important moment that you write this story about who cares about oppressed minorities, right? We just want to make sure Russia doesn't get Turkey. No, I think it's important because it does become part of this treaty and written down. The Tanzimat reforms, by the way, are a total and utter failure. How do we know that? Well, the story of the Bulgarian atrocities. You've done this story, right? You've done Bulgarian atrocities. I'd like to sort of move through it because I think it's an important part of this story. The Bulgarians are also Orthodox Christians. They were also a minority in the 19th century. In the 20th century, the Christian minorities were largely Greek, Assyrian, and Armenian. In the 19th century, this included Bulgarians and a number of other Orthodox Christians who today reside in Eastern Europe, right? The Bulgarians were essentially the first minority cause of the Western powers. What happens? You know the story, so I'll move quickly through it. But I think it's instructive. So you have the background of these Tanzimat reforms. You have the background of the Paris Peace Treaty that has humanitarianism sort of written into it. Well, in 1876, the massacre of Bulgarian civilians at the hands of the Turkish military on the eve of the Russo-Turkish War, 1878, really sparks outrage in Britain. And why does it spark outrage? Well, there's a correspondent from the Daily News who goes over there and starts reporting on them. And that news gets back. And who reads it but other than Prime Minister, or not Prime Minister at the time, but William Gladstone, former Prime Minister. He launches his campaign on behalf of the Bulgarians, not on the basis that individuals should do something, but that this is something that the Bulgarian cause needs to be part of British foreign policy, that you really need to act. Now, he doesn't say we should use guns. He doesn't say we should use military intervention. Rather, he uses a moral argument to call upon the British people to do something to stop the Bulgarians. Now, this is an easy position for Gladstone to take. He's not prime minister at the time. He's in opposition, right? He's not even in politics at this time, right? But Disraeli, who is Gladstone's rival, is in politics, and he's very skeptical of all this. He's so skeptical of it, he calls it coffee house babble. He says the Bulgarian atrocities are nothing more than coffee house babble. It's going to fade. Well, it doesn't fade. And the Bulgarian atrocities become the cause célèbre of this moment. He leads the campaign. Gladstone leads the campaigns against what he calls the Bulgarian horrors. You've read this pamphlet, right? And it's a pretty remarkable document. The public response is also interesting. It isn't that the Bulgarian atrocities would be a footnote in history if that was it. But what they spawn is a whole series, a whole institutional culture around humanitarianism, and particularly the cause of minority interests in the Ottoman Empire. So we get the Eastern Question Association gets formed right out of it. And they're not just talking about Bulgarians. They set out a whole set of pamphlets that say, look, we as Britons have a responsibility to all oppressed minorities in the Ottoman Empire, Greeks, Syrians, Bulgarians, Romanians, whoever it is, right? And these associations really are given life, if you will, because of the kind of work that's done by this Bulgarian horrors controversy that sparked. You probably know this. It sold over 200,000 copies, Gladstone's pamphlet, after its publication in September of 1876. Like the Toynbee pamphlet that you read today, the one on the murderous tyranny of the Turks, I think the Bulgarian horrors is very much a model for that Toynbee pamphlet. Let's give you some of the similarities. First, it makes the case for wrongdoing, as Gladstone does. Second, it calls upon average citizens, and more obliquely, government, to do something. Third, it posits that a humanitarian response and diplomatic response are needed. And really, where the Toynbee pamphlet, I think, does something really unique, is that it makes the case for something unique happening in the Ottoman Empire. It makes the case for genocide. Now Gladstone does not do this. But all the forms for what's going to later be part of the argument for the Armenian genocide, or why Britain should care, are sort of rehearsed, if you will, in the Bulgarian atrocities. That next step of understanding this as systematic extermination, because what happens in the Armenian case is different than what happens in Bulgaria, is taken later. But there is a sort of rhetoric, there is a sort of, if you will, a sort of dress rehearsal for what will be a response that's solicited later in 1915. And I think the Bulgarian Horrors pamphlet is really part of that, important part of that story. What else does it do? Well, there's Gladstone. So this was a picture that was published in a newspaper at the time. It would have been like reading it in the San Francisco Chronicle, if you will. This was the London Illustrated News. I guess that's not really like the San Francisco Chronicle, but it was a paper that had a lot of illustrations of political events. And this is Gladstone speaking at St. James's Hall, denouncing the Bulgarian atrocities. And it reads like a who's who list of who's there. You can notice in this image, look at the top hats. This is clearly a group of influential citizens. Look at how they're dressed. He's rallying the cause. Look at up in the rafters. These meetings drew thousands and thousands and thousands of supporters. It really was a cause that tapped into an emotion that Britons came to understand as sort of part of a legitimate part of a response. It also it prompted some very particular action. This is a picture, or again, still from the London Illustrated News, of a woodcut, I think, of Lady Strangford's hospitals. So what happens with the Bulgarian atrocities? Some folks actually go over there and start engaging in humanitarian aid work. Strangford was one of those. She starts hospitals. She starts her own fund. In fact, in the 2 years of the real Bulgarian controversy, they raised what would be the equivalent of $500,000 for aid in 1876 dollars. I mean, that's a lot of money, and it's raised not from big corporations, because they really don't exist in the same way they do today, but by people sort of taking their taking the money that's a bit extra, putting it aside, and really the passing a hat sort of a thing. Very small donations given by lots of people. So a lot of money is raised. And if you'll notice, this is a very sort of English style of hospital. This is right. What Strangford starts in Bulgaria is a hospital that she wants to sort of help mitigate suffering. And it's not just a Christian hospital, but one that helps all of victims of the conflict of the Russo-Turkish War. So it's kind of a remarkable response, I think. It isn't just about whipping people up into a frenzy to give money, but there really are folks that go over there and start engaging in real humanitarian work. It gives a real face to the story of humanitarianism and aid in the 19th century. And significantly, I'd like you to note that it's organized. It's well organized. It's not just folks sort of shooting off missives about how bad this is. It's a highly organized response. Oh, just to give you a sense of what the Eastern Question Association is, it's intended, as they cast it, it's intended to make various peoples of the East of Europe resist oppression. So they start the Eastern Question Association after the Bulgarian atrocities with that specific purpose, to help the people of the East resist oppression. That brings us to 1878, the Treaty of Berlin. So the Bulgarian atrocities happen, the Russo-Turkish War happens, 1878 is when it ends, and then there's time to sign the peace. Now you're asking yourself, if this is a war between Russia and Turkey, what the heck are Britain, France, and Germany doing at the table? Why are they there? Well, this great power politics story that I started with really is implicated in everything that happens in the Ottoman Empire. And so when it comes time to sign the peace between Russia and Turkey in 1878, they're there. And what do they write in this treaty? Very similar things to what they wrote in the 1856 Crimean War Treaty. In fact, they get more specific. In Article 61, they promise protections for Christian minorities. It isn't just about a general statement about reform, but they're saying, now look, we promise. You must promise protections. Now, there is in fact no enforcement. But the language is stronger, and it's much more visible in this treaty. It has a little more force to it, right? And it's something that people who understand the Bulgarian case as a crisis can point to.